Okay, we get started. Excuse me. We're doing talking today Sim Kuf Gimel Halacha Aleph, Nosein Lifgam. Today we're going to talk about that din, where it comes from, that this idea that Nosein Lifgam, and a little bit of detail, but really it's going to be a setup. Excuse me, for next time when we have some even more practical applications that are going to be dependent on the machlokes we're going to talk about today. Okay, so it starts like this. Something's in nevela, an animal that died without shechita, it's not kosher. And the Torah says when you have a nevela, what you should do is you should give it to a ger toshav, so he could eat it. So what's the point of that? I mean, why would the Torah tell you what you're supposed to do with this treif piece of meat? I mean, who cares what you do with it? So the Gemara says it tells that's to teach you a din that the only time in nevela or anything else that's treif is aser is when you could still give it to this ger, and the ger would be able to eat it. But if it comes to the point that this treif item is not edible at all, it's nifsal me'achila, then the whole isser doesn't apply to that case either. Okay, that teaches the din that something that's nifsal me'achila is not aser. Okay, we're going to talk more about this limud a little bit later. Okay, so that's all for food that's nifsal me'achila, it's not edible at all. Okay, but there's another case, and that is when something just is nosein lifgam, just has a negative effect on the other food, meaning this food is really edible itself, but when it interacts with another food, it has a negative effect on the kosher food. Okay, and the Rishonim prove, what we accept the din is that the Rishonim prove that there's a machlokes in the Gemara about some case, and the Rishonim say this is the case that the argument is about. The argument is about the case of nosein lifgam. Just to mention, like, how do they prove it? How do they prove that that's the case of the Gemara, as opposed to being about nifsal me'achila? So they say some of the cases that are considered nosein lifgam are food that's Blios that are in a ben yomer is nosein lifgam. And the Gemara says that if you oil or honey that's absorbed into gets a blia from non-kosher meat is also nosein lifgam. So they say people eat these things all the time. Everybody uses pots that are in a ben yomer. Nobody says, "Oh my gosh, it makes my food so horribly inedible. I can't eat it anymore." Of course not. So obviously, nosein lifgam just means that it has a negative effect on the food. It doesn't mean that it makes the food completely inedible. And that's what the Rashba says. Others, the Ran says it also. I'm just going to mention that the Ra'ah, argue on the Rashba, says that it's not true, and that nosein lifgam is for sure mutter. It's for sure aser. It has a blia of iser in it. And when the Gemara says nosein lifgam, what the Gemara means really is it's nifsal me'achila, based on the kasha that I'm about to mention in a second. A very obvious question in the Gemara why he says that, and he says not like that. The Chasam Sofer says maybe Taisus holds like that also. But anyhow, that's not the din. The din is that the machlokes of the Gemara is about nosein lifgam, and as we'll see, we hold the nosein lifgam we actually hold this mutter. Okay, so what's the machlokes in the Gemara? Rameir says that since the food absorbed treif tam, so it's usher. So like every other issur. What's it? The fact that it has a negative effect makes no difference, and the food is usher anyhow. And Shimon says that no, since it's lifgam, therefore the food is mutter. Okay, and they didn't possibly pass on like Shimon that nosein lifgam is mutter. Okay, and that's a machlokes in the Gemara. Now, what's surprising about the Gemara, what's really hard to understand about the Gemara is the Gemara says, how does he know that nosein lifgam is mutter? Where did that come from? That nosein lifgam should be mutter? He says because just like food that's nifsal me'achila is mutter, so too this is also mutter. So, and the question is obvious. What's the connection? Just because nifsal me'achila is mutter, what does it have to do with nosein lifgam being mutter? Nifsal me'achila means it's not edible at all. So if it's not edible, I'll say it this way for now. Not edible means it's like not even food anymore. So we well, at least that makes sense to us that could be mutter. But what does that mean? Just because it has a negative effect, just because the tam of this isser into that heter doesn't mix so well. Why should that make it mutter? What's the connection? Well, how could you see one from the other one? I mean, it could be that it's true that nosein lifgam is mutter, but how would you see it from the fact that nifsal me'achila is mutter? That's an obvious question on the Gemara. What is the Gemara seeing from this thing? And as I hinted at beforehand, the Ra'ah says, that proves to you that the Gemara is not talking about nosein lifgam. The Gemara is talking about really nifsal me'achila. Okay, so one of the people who answer this, there's two mahalchim the Rishonim about this. One of them is the Rashba. The Rashba says like this. He says, there's different rules for pure Isser and mixtures of Isser and tam of Isser. Is a pure Isser means is any concoction, any food, any item that has more than 50% Isser, that's treated as being pure Isser. What's the din about that? Excuse me. If you have pure Isser, again, that means more than 50% Isser, that does not become mutter unless it's nifsal me'achila. If it becomes nifsal me'achila, it's mutter. If it just has a bad taste, that would not make it mutter. Fine. But when there's less than 50% Isser, so then the regular rules of the Torah would say is when something is less than 50% Isser, it's about to arrive, and the mixture is permitted. Excuse me. The only reason why that's not true when it comes to food items is because there's a special rule called tam ki'ikar. Tam ki'ikar says is that even if the Isser is batal b'roiv, and really for all dini haTorah, bitul b'roiv is good enough. Even so, over here, since it's still nice and tam, therefore it's also. So tam ki'ikar, the Rashba says, is only when it gives a positive tam. But when the tam has a negative effect, then we don't worry about that at all. He says, that doesn't count. Okay, so in other words, again, if it's more than 50% Isser, then we say the thing is completely Isser. It needs to be nifsal me'achila. But when the issue is just that it's nice tam Lifgam, when the issue that's the only issue that it's giving a taste into the food, then it's only a problem if it gives a positive taste. If it gives a negative taste, then it's not a problem. Okay, that's what the Rashba says. So the Ran says, he brings his Rashba, he says, okay, you could say that logically if you want to say that there could be such a thing that maybe if it doesn't give a positive taste and doesn't count for tam ki'ikar, he says, okay. He says, what does it have to do with the being coming from nifsal me'achila? The Gemara says you learn this thing out. The Rav Shimon who's Mekel learns it out from the fact that nifsal me'achila is mutter. What does it have to do with nifsal me'achila? That idea that the Rashba says, that's a very nice point. Maybe it's true or maybe it's not true. But where would that come from? The fact that nifsal me'achila is mutter? They're like two totally different things. What's the connection between them? Okay, so I'm going to tell you in a minute what the Ran says. He says a different shot in the Gemara. But for now, let's see if we could try to get an answer to what did the Rashba have in mind. Okay, the Rashba doesn't say anything. Then the Ran doesn't seem like he has any explanation for the Rashba, and the Rashba himself doesn't either give any more explanation. So we'll see if we could figure out a possible explanation for what the Rashba held. How could you see from the fact that nifsal me'achila is mutter that the Rashba's idea that when you only have to worry about tam ki'ikar, then it has to be a good tam instead of a bad tam. So I'm going to tell you two different answers. One is Rabbi Nosein Dubin from Houston. He said food has two potential ways that it benefits us, two values that it could offer. One is that it gives nutrition, as we call hanos me'av. When you eat it, your body absorbs it and helps you, do what you have to do. And the second is that it tastes good. That's what we call hanos groinai. As you eat it and as you swallow it, you have a certain taste. It gives you enjoy the taste of that food. Those are two different benefits we get out of food. Now, when you have something that's inedible, a food that became completely spoiled and it's inedible, you get neither of those benefits. You don't enjoy eating it because it tastes awful, and you don't get any nutritional benefit out of it because it's nifsal me'achila also. So, the Torah says that nifsal me'achila is mutter, means it's missing both of those elements. When it's missing both of those elements, then the Isser falls off of it also. So the Gemara here is saying is that just like when you're talking about eating the food, we care if you're missing both of those elements, the food becomes mutter. So too, when the only concern here is taste, again, we're talking about tam ki'ikar, the only concern here is taste. So then, if it was missing that factor, then that would also be a reason to be mat the food. Would say, since it has no value, it's not giving you the hanos groina, you're not getting any flavor benefit out of it. So then, there's no issa to it either. So the fact that by nifsal me'achila, when you're missing both factors, the issue that apply to that fall off. So over here, when we're talking about tam, which is only relates to one factor, then when that one factor falls off, meaning it's not giving you any tam value, then there's no value from the tam, so then there's no issue to it either. Okay, this is already Dubin explained it, which is a good explanation. It's a little fuzzy only because it's going to be very similar to what the Ran's going to say soon, and the Rashba and the Ran do not agree with each other. Okay, that's his version. You could say a different explanation. I think that what I'm about to say may be the Pri Megadim's first explanation for this Rashba. I'm not sure I'm going to say the second one, but the first one at least. And that is that the answer to this question, you have to look better at the Gemara that says what I just said. The Gemara talks about what's the machlokes whether Nosein Lifgam is mutter or not. So the Gemara says like this. The Gemara says the machlokes depends on the limud that teaches us, like Gerish Sharecha Tinen V'Acholai. This limud that says this limud that says that something that's inedible is mutter. The Gemara says, so the machlokes about Nosein Lifgam is totally on that limud. What's the machlokes? The Gemara says like this. Everyone understands that the pasuk that says, that Gerish Sharecha tells you that food that's Isser that becomes nifsal me'achila, that food that is nifsal me'achila is mutter. But the machlokes is like this: the one who says Nosein Lifgam Aser says that pasuk teaches you that if the Isser was not edible before it became Isser, that's the case when it's mutter. I mean, for example, we have an animal that died, became an avela. Before it was an avela, it was already nifsal me'achila. I guess it was rotted or something was very horribly sick. It was not roy la'achila. So it was nifsal me'achila, and it never, even before it became isser, before it became an avela, it was already nifsal me'achila. That's the case when the Torah is matrit. What happens if it was isser by itself, and then it became nifsal me'achila afterwards? He said, I have no pasuk to tell you that. I have no raya for that. That's what Man Yom Nosein Lifgam also holds like that. The Man Yom Nosein Lifgam mutter holds that no, the case where it was not roy la'achila before it became isser, that's pashut that's mutter. We don't need a pasuk to tell you that that's mutter. There was never this thing was never an avela. It was already not roy la'achila before it became an avela. For sure, the isser avela is not going to be chal on it. It's not going to become asr. So then the pasuk, what is the pasuk telling you? The pasuk must be telling you for the case when it was already isser, it was already in the veil, and then it became inedible. That's the case when the Torah is telling you that the that you could be makel. So it turns out, if after you hear that is that they're not arguing whether something that's not edible is asr. It's obvious that when if it's not edible, there's no issue to it. That's obvious. The question is just, which case is it? Is it for this case or is it for that case? And we need the pasuk to tell you that even if it was already once usher, then it could still become mutter if it becomes inedible. Well, if so, that means it was the concept that something that's not, that isurim don't apply to things that are not edible. That's pashut. That's an obvious concept. The question is just, should that apply to cases only when that happens before the issur was chal, or even after the issur was chal, can it still apply? If so, now we come to another case. We have a case of Nosein Lifgam. There it's not nifsal me'achila, but there, again, the concept is still there. The concept that the Rashba says is that if something is not giving you any time, then that doesn't make a difference. So we don't need that's not what we learned from nifsal me'achila. What we learned from nifsal me'achila is just to apply that concept, to apply that svara, even to cases when it was already issa first, and then it became Nosein Lifgam. So for that's okay. We could apply. We could learn that out. We could learn out from nifsal me'achila that even if something was already usher, heterim could come later on. We could come nifsal me'achila become mutter later on. So too, if it was Nosein Lifgam, it was isser originally, but heterim could come later on also. Okay, I think that might be what the Pri Megadim says in his first explanation for the Rashba. Okay, so that was in the it's sort of how the Rashba understand the Gemara. But back to where the Rashba said was that if the tam is not giving a positive tam, then it doesn't count. We don't worry about that tam at all. That tam doesn't make a difference. That's what how the Rashba understands the Gemara. The Ran says no like this. He says when the Gemara when we have a din that says Nosein tam Lifgam, nifsal me'achila is mutter. That's teaching you like this. The only time the Torah wants to asur a food is when you get benefit from that food. If you're not getting any benefit from the food, the Torah doesn't want it to be asur. Just like so the Gemara is like this. Just like when it became nifsal me'achila, you get no benefit from it. The Torah says then it's not asur. So too when it's Nosein tam, if you're not getting any benefit from that tam, then the Torah says it's not going to be. Then the tam won't ask you either. So what we're learning from Nifsa Mechila is that just like by Nifsa Mechila, it gave you no benefit, and therefore there's no problem to have it. The Torah doesn't need to answer it when you're not getting any benefit of it. So too, if the time that it's giving into the kosher food is not giving you any benefit, then you don't have to worry about that. So it depends on the benefit of it, as opposed to the Rashba says is if it's not Nosein tam, it's not Isser, it's not time that we don't have to worry about at all. Now the Ran, there's a little bit of a diuk to what the Ran says, because the Mishnah that says the Shita that Nosein tam Lifgam is mutter says it in a little bit of an unusual way. It says Zeh haklal. This is the rule. Kol shehana osay b'nosein tam osar. Kol she'ein b'hana osay b'nosein tam mutter. Okay, so why didn't the Mishnah say it more clearly and just say if it was Nosein tam Lifgam it's osar, Nosein tam Shvach is mutter? The mentioning of b'hana osay sounds like what the Ran says, which is that it depends on whether you benefit from it. If you benefit from it, then it's also, and if you don't benefit, it's not. Now, the Ran himself says, he says there's a nafkamina between what I said and what the Rashba said. Halacha l'maisa nafkamina. Okay, which is that like this. The Rashba learns that as long as there's more than 50% heter, then Nosein Lifgam will matter the mixture. It makes no difference. In all cases, as long as there's more than 50% heter, the mixture is going to be mutter. It's just the tam Lifgam doesn't count at all. It makes no difference. The Ran says, no, that's only true if it doesn't give you any benefit, which would be in most cases, it doesn't give you a benefit. But if there's going to be a case where you get some kind of a benefit out of the tam, not because it tastes good, some other kind of a benefit from it, then it'll be usher. Because the whole heter is if it's not giving you any benefit. If it gives you some other benefit, not a taste benefit, some other benefit, then it's gonna be usher. Okay, now that sounds like a very theoretical case. The Ran makes it as if it sounds like a very theoretical case. What, I got some other benefit out of it aside from the fact that it was nice, that giving taste of what other benefit would I get from it? So Mir Hashem, that's I told you. This is a setup for next time. Next time we're going to talk about cases, practical cases where the Nosein tam Lifgam actually gives us another benefit that, according to the Ran, we would have to be machmer and asa the food. And then we'll talk about that in Mir Hashem next time. So we're all set up. The Rashba will be makel. The Rashba says, I don't care if you get a benefit from it. If it's not giving a positive tam, then it doesn't count at all. No, if it's not giving positive tam, there's no tam kicker. And therefore it's mutter. I don't care what other benefit you get. And the Ran says, no, it depends on benefit. And therefore, if there's no positive, if there's no benefit, then there's no isser. Again, we could tell you next time about practical applications. Okay. So now for the rest of just another few minutes for me to say some other details or examples having to do with Nosein tam Lifgam, not necessarily with the machlokes. So one thing is. Okay, so the most, I'm sorry, the most obvious, I'm just mentioning it because I'm trying to give you a bunch of details. I mentioned this a bunch of times already, that Nosein tam Lifgam is mutter means it doesn't make a difference whether the food, the isser itself tastes good. The isser itself could taste perfectly good. But the isser's effect on the heter is that it tastes bad, it makes the heter taste worse. That's Nosein tam Lifgam. Okay, now, the Rama says here in Yerdeh, the Rama says that tam ki'ikr is only for your everyday regular isurim, which have to do with which depend on the rules of Bitul b'shishim, whether it's Nosein tam and those kind of things like that. So if it's Nosein tam Lifgam, then we say we don't need Bitul b'shishim because Nosein tam Lifgam, the tam doesn't have to worry about that. But the Rama says, what happens if we get to cases where you don't depend on tam? Like, for example, like a burial, or davar minyan, where the din is that even if it's not Nosein tam, meaning even if it was Bitul b'shishim, it would still make the food aser. So tam makes no difference in that case. Okay, tam makes no difference. So if tam makes no difference, then even Nosein tam Lifgam is going to be aser. Because Nosein tam Lifgam says the tam doesn't count. I don't care if the tam counts. The iser is not Bitul no matter what. Excuse me. So even Nosein tam Lifgam should be usher in those kind of cases. Now, the Rambam in Aruch says therefore, Nosein tam Lifgam doesn't make a difference for chametz on Pesach, because chametz that mixes into food on Pesach is usher b'mashahu, meaning we don't care whether it's Nosein tam or not. Well, the Rambam says, so if we don't care if it's Nosein tam or not, then if we don't care if it's Nosein tam or not, then it's going to be then it'll be also even if it's Nosein tam Lifgam. Okay, that's what the Rama says in Aruch, which is what we Ashkenazim will do. Now, just to pause for a second over here, is that The Beis Yosef in Or Chaim says this idea that on chametz on Pesach is even Nosein of Gam is also comes from a Rashba, and the Pri Megadim says, good, that's L'shitas, it makes sense. The Rashba over here explained to us why Nosein of Gam is mutter, because the tam doesn't count, and therefore over there he says, well, it comes for Pesach. When we don't care about tam, then it should be also on Pesach. Okay, that makes sense. The Beis Yosef himself says, it says, this that I told you from the Rashba, that Nosein of Gam and Pesach is also, is different from a Rush, because the Rush says Nosein of Gam means is there's no Isser at all. The Isser it's as if zero. It's not it's not Isser that was Bitul and just the tam doesn't count. It's not Isser at all if it's Nosein of Gam, and therefore the Rush says that Nosein of Gam on Pesach is Nosein of Gam on Pesach is mutter also. He says it doesn't make a difference. Nosein of Gam, it's not tam. If it's not here. It's not here. Then it doesn't make a difference. Okay, it's a little bit related to the reminiscent of the Pri Megadim says that it's a little bit reminiscent of this Ran, that if it's not that Nosein of Gam is not usher at all, and therefore it doesn't need to even if it's on Pesach, it'll be mutter also. Okay, so the Ramah is fine. The Ramah says that Nosein of Gam and Pesach is usher, and our halacha, the Ramah agrees, of course, with what the Mechaber says that Nosein that over here it's. I'm sorry, it agrees with the Ramah. It's connected with the Ramah over here, who said that by barriers and chatichul iskabelis and things like that, there's no heter of Nosein of Gam. That's all fine for the Ramah. The problem is that the Mechaber in the next halacha is going to bring the Rashba and the Ran. He's going to bring both of these shitas as legitimate shitas. But in Or Chaim, in Hilchos Pesach, he says that Nosein of Gam on Pesach is mutter, which is going to the shita of this Rush. So what's going on over here? Does he pass like the Rashba, or he doesn't pass like the Rashba? The Rashba, again, the Pri Megadim said the Rashba was l'shitosei. If you pass like the Rashba, the Nosein of Gam is mutter because it's not the tam doesn't count, and therefore it could just be bata baroiv. Then it should be also on Pesach when chametz is b'mashahu. Okay, so it's a kasha on the Mechaber. What seems like a stira in the Mechaber somewhat. Rabbi Krieger says, Rabbi Krieger in Chuvas says. That since there are those who are makel but Isser Mashahu on Pesach, and we're all used to the fact that Chametz is also b'Mashahu, but there's others who don't agree with that, and therefore in this special din, therefore he's going to be makel like that. Okay, others the Minchas Kohen has other answers. Okay, let's move on. We're also going to talk about another thing in when we get to Siman Kuf Daled about bugs, about how Nosein of Gam plays a role into the also. We'll leave that for now. Okay. The most common example of all of Nosein of Gam is something that I mentioned quickly at the beginning, which is a kli that's Eina ben Yarmer. Kli that's Eina ben Yarmer, the Blios that come out of it are assumed to be Nosein of Gam, and in Mitzvah Hashem in a couple of weeks we'll talk about that whole din of Nosein of Gam for Eina ben Yarmer. Okay, another example, another somewhat common example of Nosein of Gam is soap, and some time ago we spoke about how the soap and things like that, the Nosein of Gam might make a difference when you wash kosher or non-kosher dishes in the same sink or in the same dishwasher and things like that. Okay, so now just let me run through a bunch of other, I like 8 or 9 other little things having to do with Nosein of Gam. The poskim say that if someone's not sure whether something is Nosein of Gam or not, they should be machmer and assume that it is not Nosein of Gam. I mean, they should be machmer and assume that it makes the food aser. Another thing is, we spoke about this when we learned Hagal's Kalim, is Rav Shechter said that if something has a taste good, it's not Nosein of Gam. The taste is pleasant, but it has a really bad odor, then that's also considered to be Nosein of Gam. And Rebelsky, in a related thing, said that even let's say it tastes good and it smells good or has no smell or taste to it, but it's poisonous, that would also consider Nosein of Gam. It also qualifies for the same thing to be Nosein of Gam. Okay, the Mechaber in Halacha Beis, we're in Halacha Aleph today, but the Mechaber in Halacha Beis talks about what happens if something goes. There's different parts of a process, and at some parts of the process is Nosein of Gam, and other parts is Lishvach. In either order, whichever happens, at some point it's of Gam, some parts it's Lishvach. It sounds really unusual, but in Mirz Hashem, next time we're going to talk about some examples where that din is relevant. It's sometimes Lifgam, sometimes Lishvach. It changes in the middle. We're going to have a practical example, so I'm going to wait to talk to you till then. Okay, way back when, at the beginning of these dinim, we spoke about a couple of things. One was Zev Zagorim, that if a heter and isra together create a tam, then they have then it might be batal. Then the isra that's Nosein tam might be batal. And there we said that when one of them, is Nosein Lifgam, it's easier to qualify for Zev Zagorim. Okay, I'm not going through all the details, but that's what we spoke about then. Okay, we also spoke about some time ago what happens if you make we spoke about a situation when you make gum base, like when you make chewing gum out of the gum base, you made it with non-kosher fatty acid, and we spoke about there that maybe it's whether Hanan plays a role in that thing, and that it should potentially not apply to things that are inedible, like gum base inherently is inedible, and from our side, the fatty acids that are mixed into the gum base there's another angle, which is they might also be considered Nosein Lifgam. That's another reason to possibly make about that case. Okay, and we also spoke about way back when about pigima of a steam system and how Nosein Lifgam plays a role into that. Okay, the Gemara says that I mentioned this also really in passing, that tam of meat is Lifgam into oil, into like cooking oil, like olive oil, and that din is brought in Kuf Gimel. We spoke about it when we learned halachas of Stam Yayin. Maybe we really won't repeat what that is when we come into that in Kuf Gimel. And last but not least, is that one of the questions about we buy new pots and pans that are coated with something before you buy them. One of the questions relates to that is whether Nosein Lifgam. We will Mirz Hashem talk about that in Siman Kuf Gimel. That's the plan anyhow, to speak about it when we get there. Okay, thank you, bye.